signing in, I'm just preparing, doing final housekeeping before I do online Zoom discussion on the film Alexander with Malcolm Mann. Signing in 8 o'clock, which is in a few minutes. So I'm just doing some very, very quick housekeeping and literally minutes to go. Ooh. So, no, come on. Here we go. And I hope you're all well. I'm broadcasting to you from Wales, in North Wales to be precise. And yeah, I've been having a good time. Been in Portmeirion today, so it's my Wi-Fi. Hello. I'm about to do an online discussion. By the way, for those joining, any questions, anything you want to ask, anything you feel you want to contribute to, please don't hesitate. And we'll happily get you involved. We will answer your questions. And yes. Okay. Patience. And just there we go. And we're about to fully live stream. Once again, I've had to move very, very quickly with this. So I thank you so much for your patience. It's much appreciated. And yes, we'll now bring Malcolm into the room. If you just bear with me. And hi, Malcolm. Hello, can you hear me? Oh, you're connecting to audio. Bear with me for 3 seconds.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, double the amount of time I promised. I apologize.
Shocking.
I know. Lighting's not so brilliant. It's not being. Is that good? No. Unless.
That's much better.
That is much better. I'm in a cottage in Wales.
Oh, right. Excellent.
Yes, in
north, south, east, west.
North, in the county of Conwy.
Okay, no idea where that is.
Well, you know where about Portmeirion?
Not really.
Where the Prisoner was filmed. That's just a county away from there.
Right, okay.
Not far from Anglesey, put it that way. We'd probably make Anglesey within an hour if we set off in a car.
Okay, I should better look it up, I think.
Yes. But all's good. Are you all right?
Doing good, thank you. Yeah, here in London. Avoided getting soaked in the rain today, which is always a good thing.
Oh, has it been raining?
Briefly, only briefly. So yeah, but I went out without a coat, so it was a bit,
Yeah.
oh dear. But I was on the bus at the time, so
Yes.
it was fine. Yeah, so everything's good.
Good.
Enjoying the post-football glow.
It was, and Rachel and I watched it on the TV here last night. We did not dare watch it in the pub. I'm sure they'll be very nice, and we did go to the pub afterwards
Yeah,
for all of 10 minutes. But we kind of feared uh, that if we were cheering away in front of Welsh, it might seem a bit bad mannered for all we knew.
right. Okay, fair
But,
enough.
they're very nice guys. They said you should have, when we came in for a drink, they said you should have watched it with us. So
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
yeah, it was a great performance. It's a pity about the laser pen incident. That really,
yeah, and that
um,
could have cost us far.
I don't get why people do that,
Yeah,
but there it is. That took the shine off it for me, but it's still a great performance by the team.
mm,
Um, yeah, they deserve to be in the final. I wish they hadn't played Denmark, but because I quite like Denmark. But it's
yeah,
yeah. I watched some of it.
yeah.
I didn't stay
Oh,
up to watch the extra time,
oh,
but so I just picked up the result later, or hours later when I woke up during the night.
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, Italy will be very tough. If they beat Italy, that will be quite an achievement.
That is true, but I do think at the same time, Italy. Let's get it to get to where we are. We've never got this far in the European matches,
Yeah,
and it's the first time since 1966.
yeah, yeah.
So to get here, was quite something. But talking of conflict and everything else,
See
uh,
what you're doing there. Very clever.
yes, indeed. Um, yeah, Alexander. Uh,
Alexander the Great. Yeah,
yeah, the film came out in 2004, I understand.
that's right. Yep.
Yeah, and had a not exactly an all-star cast, but a fairly prestigious cast.
Yeah, that's the last thing we need to argue about. It's a quite a few famous actors in there.
Yes,
Yeah. Um,
the late Christopher Plummer, Anthony Hopkins, Colin Farrell, obviously as Alexander, and his parents played by Angelina Jolie and Val Kilmer.
yeah.
Well, actually, one thing I don't know if you noticed, they did, with the way they've done modern forensic on identifying murder victims, they've done with people in history, with skeletons, like their skeletons, so forth. They did it with Richard III. They
Yeah.
do a build up of their face
Yeah.
to try and work out what they actually look like.
Yeah.
I believe, if I remember correctly, they did this with Philip II, Alexander's father. And I remember the image at the time. And what surprised me seeing this film was Val Kilmer looked a spitting image of that.
Yeah. There's one particular mock-up of Philip
Yes.
I'm thinking of that. I wonder if they based it on that one.
Mm.
The shape of the face, the beard. There are some elements of Philip that
Yeah.
you don't need that to think about it that much. He would have had a beard
Yes.
because all men did, almost all men. Alexander very notably didn't. But most Greek men, that was the thing, having beards. So the shape of his skull in the 70s, what's presumed to be his grave was found in Macedonia in Greece.
Yes.
When we talk, for the sake of, or the avoidance of doubt, when we talk about Macedonia now, we're going to be talking about Macedonia, which is now part of Greece,
Yeah.
rather than North Macedonia.
Which is an independent country of itself.
It's got
Yeah.
nothing to do with Alexander, but that's a whole nother
Yes.
issue. So in a place called Vergina, and anyone Greek or who knows the Greek language will have to forgive us from the outset for our Anglicizations and mispronunciations.
Yes.
But Vergina in Macedonia, Greek Macedonia, some tombs were found in the 70s, and one of them to be Philip's, and his remains of his bones were found, including, I think, his skull, and that's where that picture that I'm thinking of comes from. And we know from sources, classical sources, that he lost an eye at a place called Methone, one of his what's the word? When he attacked a city, he laid siege to it and was shot.
Yes.
So that's why in the film he's got just got the one eye. So yeah, there's a mixture of ancient source and modern interpretation going on there, and rebuilding the image. I'm not wholly fond of the way they portrayed him, is in terms of his character.
Who, Philip?
Philip.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I think I think they portray him as a bit more rough and ready than he actually was. I think he was a smart man. He was a really, really good diplomat, as much as he was a general. He was a very good general and a very good diplomat as well. He was very interested in all things Greek. Ancient Macedonians were, they're kind of like the lost tribe of Greece, the sundered tribe is how I often look at them. So they're ethnically Greek, but they'd broken apart from southern Greece at some point. That's why their language was a dialect of Greek rather than being more directly related. And they were a bit more rough and ready. They, unlike everywhere else in Greece, or most other places rather, they still had a monarch, and they drank their wine neat, which other Greeks didn't, so on and so forth. And I think the Macedonians could be very rough and ready, and that's how they went with Philip. I think they did him a slight injustice with that. Although some of the rough things that you see in the film, like the wedding incident where he gets drunk and falls between the tables, that's in the sources, so it happened. Whether it happened exactly like that, it's very hard to say because the sources have their own prejudices. But he had a lot of culture about him as well, which the film doesn't really bring out.
No, and and this leads to a general question. I'm one of these people, when I know of a particular event in history in detail, I do get frustrated when I see a film of that event because I can spot all the inaccuracies.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, how do you feel about the film in terms of because I know you know a lot about what happened about the life and times of Alexander the Great, compared to what you know and what the film shows, how accurate is the film? And on a level of 1 to 10, how big is your frustration, with 10 being the highest?
I would give it an easy 7 and perhaps go up to an 8. The problem,
so you are fairly frustrated with it?
Not with its accuracy.
No.
I think my problem with it, any frustration I have with it, I think my principal frustration is with the accent choice. The upper class Macedonians being given very obvious Irish accents, and others, well, usually have English accents. I'm not frustrated because they've given the upper class people Irish and not English accents, but because that's such a novel way of showing a particular class that because it's so novel, you notice it, whereas you don't so much with English accents. So, I don't mind so much in films where we see, say, during the war, Second World War, if the Germans are given English accents, you kind of expect that. So it's not a big deal. It's just
No.
it's a well-established trope. Whereas use of Irish accents isn't. So that kind of gets in the way somewhat, and it always does whenever I watch the film. It is, I think, reasonably accurate in terms of the outline of Alexander's life. It leans a lot on the sources, admirably, I think. It doesn't move too far away from them. Any frustration I have there is in the interpretation. The film is really twofold, two big themes: Alexander the Conqueror, Alexander and his family. It looks at Alexander through his family, his relationship to his mother especially, and obviously his father. And I think it does that a bit too much. The real Olympias, Alexander's mother, was a big part of Alexander's life, even though she was not with him from 334 BC onwards. They never saw each other again, but she wrote him lots of letters, kept in regular touch, complaining a lot about what was going on, haranguing his friends, threatening them, or threatening the one friend who it was a waste of time trying to threaten, Hephaestion. So yeah, that, I think, if I had a frustration, it's with the interpretation. But it is, I think, in terms of its outline, the course of his life from 334 onwards, I'd say it's reasonably accurate, allowably so.
I get the impression from what I've heard historically that his mother was a nasty piece of work.
Yeah, in the sources, they've got no time for her whatsoever. She comes across very badly. The film looks at her, refers to her worship of snakes, which is accurate. Like I said, she wrote him a lot of letters complaining about the regent in charge of Macedon when Alexander was away, a guy called Antipater, which that's part of the course. She is portrayed as being a very cruel person.
Yes.
A ruthless and cruel person. On the other hand, all of the sources are writing with an agenda, and an anti-woman agenda as well, an anti-Olympias agenda. Women in ancient Greece, so far as I can tell, they're much to the side. They're indoors, out the way. Their place is not getting involved in the affairs of state. So, and of course, the cardinal sin, Olympias, was, I think, from Epirus. I hope I've got that right, from Epirus. So, she's a bit barbaric as well. So yeah, she offended the ancient writers very much just by being a very public figure. There's only one piece of evidence in the sources that I can think of where she comes across as being a bit more humble. The film addresses the idea of Alexander's divinity.
Yes, about her mother said that she slept with Zeus.
That comes from the sources, and it's alleged that before he left Greece or Macedonia for the last time in 334, Olympias told him the secret of his birth, that she slept with Ammon Zeus, or Zeus Ammon, not with Philip. So Zeus Ammon is his father, not Philip. It's a big debate about whether Alexander truly believed this, or if he promoted the idea as a political thing. But Plutarch is the one who mentions this, but he also mentions that Olympias said exactly the opposite thing to Alexander, that she was going to, very roughly, verbatim, she would get into trouble because she, I can't remember who she blamed, but other people were saying that Zeus was involved in his birth somehow. I've butchered the anecdote, but it's in there in Plutarch, and it shows Olympias being a lot more humble. But yeah, she otherwise comes out really badly in the sources, and I imagine that, yeah, she would have had to have been tough as nails, perhaps even ruthless, in order to survive the Macedonian court. But one has to be mindful when one reads the sources that they had an agenda, and it would have not been favorable to her in the slightest. So a pinch of salt with what is said about her, even if a lot of it is actually true. There's a lot more going on in the past that we don't really know about because we were not told it.
Yes.
Yeah.
What did you? It's clearly a film that you like to. What have you seen any other version of Alexander? And whether you have or haven't, how do you rate this film?
Well, the version I have is Alexander Revisited. So I think that's the third version that came out.
Yeah.
Cinematic release. I think there's a director's cut, and then Alexander Revisited. And I'm glad I've not seen the earlier versions, especially the cinematic one, because I think that would be very frustrating. There's so much of Alexander's life, trying to pack it into a cinema release, too much. So I like the version that I have a lot, and I'm very grateful for it. So, I mean, if I can give it a score separate to the score I gave earlier, I'd say easy 8 out of 10. Any higher, it would have to be a really remarkable film, and it isn't. It's just a good cut. There's another one that came after it, I think called The Ultimate Cut. One day I should try and watch that, but I haven't seen it yet.
I remember I first heard of Alexander the Great when many years, it was so long ago, I think it was when Richard Burton was still alive.
Right.
I remember one weekend or one Sunday or Easter bank holiday Monday, I was at my Bergen grandparents' house and it was on. I ought to look it up on the great thing about Radio Times Genome is you can see when you have a vague memory of watching something in childhood, your early adulthood, you can go back and you can find exactly the date you watched it. And so I will do that at some point. I think afterwards I will look it up and watched it. But I remember watching it some afternoon, and it was the first time I heard of Alexander the Great or knew of him. This film with Richard Burton, and I think it was one of mine, made in the 1950s. And I don't remember very much. My chief memory of it was actually when Philip gets assassinated and Alexander becomes king. And I think obviously it was a lot more varnished compared to the Oliver Stone version, which
I imagine it was
and I have to say, with the Oliver Stone version, I did feel slightly uncomfortable with it. I can't put my finger on it. I just did. I think maybe it's the things that we don't like or the things we're uncomfortable with about the whole environment around Alexander that we perhaps look with 20th, 21st century sensibilities come out, are paramount in that. But I mean, it does kind of, one of the things I do like about the film is it does make a heavy emphasis on this conquests, which I mean you couldn't do without. But they also the use of Anthony Hopkins as well. In that film, that could have easily been ignored, but I think that was so important to the film. I think you needed that kind of balance, really.
I mean, the film misses out so much of Alexander's life that you need a narrator for sure, I think, just to cover the parts that are not going to be included properly into the film. So that's what Anthony Hopkins as the older Ptolemy does. And he also gives the film an opportunity to put Alexander into his context of how he was seen by the successors. Well, according to Oliver Stone, we've really no idea what the successors by which I mean Alexander's generals who fought for and then took over the different parts of his empire after Alexander himself died in 323 BC. So we get Ptolemy's view. It's really Oliver Stone's version of Ptolemy. We've no idea what Ptolemy himself thought.
Yes.
Presumably he admired him, but who knows? So it has a backward and a forward function. Explains the parts that missed out, and then gives us an overview at the end of who Alexander was, what he meant, and another version of what truly happened to him in June, late May, early June 323, when he died. The film obviously goes down the route of possibly assassination.
Do you think he was assassinated? I mean, it's very mysterious.
He could have been. Macedonian kings had a habit of not dying in their beds.
Yeah.
Philip was just one of many Macedonian kings who died violently. So it's perfectly possible. Whether he did or not, we don't know. It's equally possible that Alexander drank too much, just as he had been doing all his life. The Macedonian habit, as I mentioned earlier, and it just got too much for his body, which had already been really badly wounded over the years of his conquests.
And not just that, he would have been traveling. I mean, he had one of the mightiest empires in the ancient world. He all that travel through inhospitable lands, would have, on top of the heavy drinking and fighting, would have.
Absolutely, and just prior to return to Babylon in 323, he had a year or two earlier, a bit more, gone through a desert, a very harsh trip through a desert, which claimed the lives of a lot of people. So he'd been through deserts, he had been up mountains, he had survived a monsoon in India, or what is now Pakistan, but in antiquity was part of India. He had put his body through an awful lot, like I say, in the course of his conquests, and that's before the heavy drinking and the injuries that came from his efforts. So if he had caught something like West Nile fever or malaria, it's equally possible that that could have taken him. The idea that he was poisoned possibly comes from the period after he died.
Yes.
And so could be the people principally named as his assassins, Antipater through his son Cassander. They were the enemies of Olympias during the wars of the successors. That's Alexander's generals when they fought each other for control of the empire. So it would make sense that someone, a partisan who supported Olympias, if not Olympias herself, would put the word out that, oh, who killed my son? Antipater and Cassander did, directly, indirectly. We just don't know. Without a body, we'll never know. It's perfectly possible, but it's equally possible that he died of natural causes.
Yes.
Most we can say about it.
Of course, we don't know what happened to his body, do we? Because in about...
no, we don't. There are little stories. It should have gone back to the tomb where probably Philip was found, or there and thereabouts, back to Greece, back to Macedonia. Alexander, one source says that Alexander wanted it taken to the oasis of Siwa, which is just west of, or was west of Egypt in antiquity. It's now part of Egypt. However, on the way back, it was taken, embalmed, and a big hearse was made for it. It was so big and well built and lots of ornaments that it took about 2 years to build. And then when finally it went on its way, Ptolemy stole the body and took it to Egypt, to Memphis first, and then when
Oh,
Alexandria had been rebuilt, it was
yeah.
there. The purpose of that was not necessarily because he loved Alexander, but because it was a massive political statement. Whoever had the body of the king was buried by his successor. So by stealing Alexander's body, Ptolemy is saying, I'm Alexander's true successor. Even if I'm not actually in Macedonia, I'm the one who's his real successor. So it's a political move as much as anything else. And it was put in a mausoleum in Alexandria
Yeah.
and stayed there. And it was seen by lots and lots of people, including the likes of Augustus Caesar.
Yes.
And Julius Caesar, and was lost in 215, or last seen in 215 AD, when the Roman Emperor Caracalla ordered the grave to be bricked up. 200 years later, the location had been lost. One of the church fathers, I can't remember which one, but there's a letter surviving from him where he talks about Alexander's grave and says, where is it? I've no idea where it is. Allegedly, people later on, many, many, many years later on, knew where it was, but he didn't. It probably fell into the sea because the royal area or the royal district in Alexandria fell into the sea, perhaps due to an earthquake in antiquity. So
was that the same time the famous lighthouse?
Yeah, that may have gone as well. Yeah, Pharos. Yeah, maybe that was lost at the same time. We don't know when it happened, or even if it is what happened, but it's probably one of the simpler answers. So there are people that suggest that the body was survived and ended up being mistaken for the body of Saint Mark, who was buried in Alexandria, and was taken to St. Mark's Cathedral in Italy, in Venice. There are other possibilities that people put forward, but the simplest one is that it was lost during an earthquake when the royal quarter vanished. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, I always assumed it had been destroyed by a mob around the 4th century. But
that's unlikely because there's no mention of it, and something that significant would probably get a mention.
Yeah.
If, for example, there's the scientist. I've forgotten her name now. A film was made about her not long ago, and that's terrible. Alexandrian scientist. She was killed by a mob, I think, who may have been incited by one of the church fathers. I think Saint Cyril. Apatia, or I think that's her name.
Yeah.
Oh, apologies to anyone watching who's very frustrated with the name, but so she is a well-known figure of ancient Alexandria, and her fate is known. I think there's debate about what exactly happened with her, so I don't want to say it was definitely this, but she died violently, and she gets mentioned. So even in the Christian era or AD era, so I would still expect Alexander, who was obviously a lot more famous than she was, if his body was torn apart by a mob, someone would have mentioned that. So the fact that it isn't mentioned anywhere, well, someone might have said something and we've just lost the text. But otherwise, I would think that it perhaps fell into obscurity after, in the AD, the Christian era, and there were other things going on. And if it was written down, the information wasn't preserved, and it was just forgotten about thereafter as people try to live in perhaps straitened circumstances.
So, how do you, going further into the actual film, the choice of Oliver Stone, he's caused controversy with his film JFK,
Yep.
the Kennedy assassination, and also his film biopic of Richard Nixon.
Which, to stick with JFK for a second, he's going back to again at the Cannes Film Festival. He's made a documentary called JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass, based on documents that the American government have since declassified since that film was made 30 years ago. So anyone who's interested in JFK, that's coming out soon as well.
Okay, so on the basis of Oliver Stone's, the fact he can be controversial and there's a sort of political agenda, does that translate into the ancient world? Were there issues did you feel he was pursuing an agenda of Alexander that you didn't like, or one you agreed with, or?
That's a good question. So Oliver Stone is known, I think, in my mind, you can correct me if this isn't correct, for being left-wing, and certainly a controversialist, and a lover of his conspiracy theories, or of conspiracy theory, or certainly someone who's prepared to accept them. I did not get any sense of his politics in Alexander. This is a film straight down the line. It's about Alexander. It's not about the soldiers, the rank and file. And Alexander is not portrayed in a way that denigrates him and lifts up the rank and file, which perhaps you might expect a left-wing film director that would be the kind of film he would make. Why would he want to show the king or the establishment in a good light? I think, for me, his film is one part post-Freudian, and
there is an emphasis on him and his mother, isn't there?
Yeah, massive emphasis. So there's, because of that, post-Freudian or Freudian, and one part, it's I'm not sure how I'd describe it, an LGBT film, because of the attention it pays to Alexander's relationship with Hephaestion and the eunuch Bagoas, both of which I bet did not feature in the Richard Burton film.
No. I mean, it's been nearly 40 years since I've seen that.
I would be most surprised if in a film of the 50s that same-sex relationships were portrayed there.
And I don't think Richard Burton would be happy to have... Actually, no, I tell you, I will correct that, because there were 2 occasions he played homosexuals on film, and not all that much, as far as I'm aware. I haven't really seen them, so I can't probably judge, but not in a very negative way. So if you're prepared to do that at the time, I think there's one he did with Rex Harrison.
Right.
They played these lovers who lived together in a house. I don't know the film. It's pretty much just those 2. It's a very obscure film. And another one called Villain, which was clearly based on Ronnie Kray.
Right.
It's strange seeing Richard Burton come out of a Cockney accent, but you got this sense in the film that it wasn't. He was playing a villain who happened to be gay, rather than it being.
Okay, interesting.
But in the obviously the sensibilities of the time, But he did. It was at the time he did the film. He did it. It was 1956.
Okay.
Under the Great, and it also starred Frederick March, who played Philip, Claire Bloom. Further, Stanley Baker is Attalus, Peter Cushing is Memnon. This is Michael Hordern as Demosthenes. Peter Wingard, who later played Jason King, as Pausanias.
Pausanias,
that's it. And I don't think there's any other big name. Oh, Claire Bloom played Barcine.
One of
And
my
an actress called Danielle Dario played Olympias.
yeah.
Oh, she died quite recently. I just looked up. Born 1st of May 1917, died 17th of October 2017.
Gosh, 100 years old.
Yes.
That's a good.
But you don't, not often. I mean, I know Olivia de Havilland and Kirk Douglas died fairly recently.
Yeah, he was even
But
older.
yeah, exactly. And Olivia de Havilland was the last survivor of the Gone with the Wind cast. But the ironic thing about that was she played the only character who died on screen in that film.
Yeah.
So
I've never seen it, so yeah.
You know, but yeah, so I haven't seen the I'm going to look it up on the genome to see when I saw it, because it will, you know, a film like that I only saw the once, and I will want, you know, order of relevance first broadcast. So I'm being horribly only retentive here, I'm sure.
While you're doing that, I'll say to anyone now or later, the first half hour, if you want to know more of Alexander, watch the first half hour, especially in Alexander Revisited, the Battle of Gaugamela. That is absolutely superb in its depiction of what that battle was like.
Yes.
It seems a little on one of the earlier battles. It brings in an incident where Alexander is nearly killed from one of his earlier battles into this one.
Yeah.
But in terms of how it sets the battle up and shows the movements, the center, the right and the left, it's absolutely brilliant. But have a strong stomach because it's very bloody as well.
Yeah.
Not entirely for the faint-hearted.
I do. I know the when I saw this film, one of the things I haven't mentioned that I think I ought to mention is I mean, Philip does not come across well, but at the same time, you know, he comes across as an aggressive, unpleasant, drunk, blah blah blah. But I felt very sorry for him. I felt he was I can't explain it, but I felt he was hard done by.
I think he is, and I think he's put up in opposition to Alexander. So Alexander is the softer, more tender person, and his father is the more brutish one. So rather than in real life, you know, there's a lot of crossover. Alexander could be very soft and tender, but also entirely brutal, and so could Philip. But when you make a film, as much as when you just write a story, you don't want your two characters to be so similar.
Yeah.
Because you ask yourself, well, why have I got these two characters? One of them's not bringing much new to the table. And I imagine that's why Oliver Stone said, well, okay, this is about Alexander. I'm sympathetic to him. Let's make Philip the more rough-hewn man and focus on those aspects of him rather than on his cultural interests and that kind of thing.
I was right in how long ago I saw Alexander the Great. It is listed. And I did see it when Richard Burton was still alive. I think when he died, I knew who he was when he died, but I hadn't heard of him for very long.
Right.
Is, you know, when you first hear of famous people and when they die, it's like, you know, you'd only heard of them in the last XYZ. But it was broadcast, and I haven't seen it since. I hasten to add, it was broadcast on Sunday, the 13th of November, 1983. And I was right, it wasn't a Sunday afternoon at 2:20 p.m. So my sister would have been a few weeks old. So, but yeah. So I haven't seen that film. For the reason I'm being anally retentive and looking this up, because I wanted to know exactly when I saw it and how long ago. I haven't seen, I'm referring to a film I've only seen once, and it was nearly 38 years ago. That's scary. It's bad enough I'm 45 and but I am in quite shocked that I can remember things that were over 40 years ago, which is yeah, but yeah, it's quite. I've got there's a couple of comments from our dear friend Liz Evershed,
hello.
who I did. I hope she won't mind me repeating some of it. If you're watching, Liz, and you do mind, I sincerely apologise. But I did alert her to this because I know she liked one of our discussions. So
Right.
she said that she asked you whether you considered a PhD on Alexander because you had aimed it. She has bowed out saying, well done again, champs. I'm hampered a little by not having seen any of the films, so we'll bow out now. Impressed as ever by your general and particular knowledge on so many topics.
I shall send her a tweet to say, Liz, you only need to invite me round with the DVD. I'll drop it off and then go.
I will send that message, but I would say to Liz, to those who don't know of you, she is a highly intelligent woman, and I admire her in a number of ways, and she's one of my longest standing of friends. But for saying that she bows out impressed by general and particular knowledge, there's some things like, say, Shakespeare, where she could wipe you and I out of the park very, very easily. But it's
because she's too kind. She would gently put us to rights.
Yes. But yeah, just in it. But yeah, looking
now. The PhD question. I don't really want to be an academic, so I wouldn't do it for that reason. I suppose if I had the time and money, I'd consider it.
Yeah.
But Alexander for me is a private interest. So I'm happy, I guess, for the time being to leave it at that level. But who knows in the future. But yeah, it would have to be according to time and money.
I will say I am surprised, thinking about it briefly, that Shakespeare never wrote a play on Alexander.
Very frustrating, yeah. He wasted time in Julius Caesar. Who cares about him?
I know, and I wouldn't.
Yeah, it's
not fair. I actually think, I mean, well, there are two things I need to bring up, Malcolm, and I think this is the first time we're probably in conflict. First of all, I remind you of something you once said to me of how you got interested in ancient Greece, and that was through watching correct me if I'm wrong, the HBO miniseries Rome.
Yeah,
so it was the very thing. And secondly, with Shakespeare's Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
Historically, I don't hold a candle to Mark Antony because he was an enemy of Cicero, and Cicero, for all his faults, and he did have faults, is one of my big political heroes in that he defended democracy as limited and as fallible as democracy there. And he defended the Republic, and he did it to his death against a bunch of, and I regard Antony as a bit of a thug. But in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Antony is a total hero in some ways. And my favorite political speech of all time, whether genuine or from fiction, is actually Shakespeare's doing Mark Antony's funeral oration in Julius Caesar.
Okay, yeah.
And obviously we're going off topic here, but there are connections, I think, between the ancient world of Greece and the ancient world of Rome, in that you saw the beginnings of the sort of civilization we have now, the beginnings of democracy, the beginnings of some of the laws and ways of living that we have today.
Yeah.
And the thing I loved about Mark Antony's funeral oration is the fact that he goes along on the surface with what the Caesar's assassins have said, but he says to the crowd, he mentions, look, I'm not come to praise Caesar, I've come to bury him. But, this is the Caesar I remember. And he mentions all the things he remembered about Caesar and loved him. And he said, I'm sorry about them because, Brutus says he was ambitious and Brutus is an honorable man. And then he goes on all the things, and he ends each one. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honourable man. And a brilliant thing about that, as you know, is the more he says Brutus is an honourable man, it hammers home the opposite. Brutus is not an honourable man. Brutus is over to, and in terms of a political speech, I think that is, that is a favourite of mine because of the way he tells the truth as he sees it, but he's very careful he knows the very thin line he is on, and he sticks to it, and at the same time wins over the crowd.
Yeah, he's on the side of the people, just like Shakespeare.
Yes.
The stranger as well.
Yes. So in terms of, what was it about Rome that led you to Athens, to
Macedon, to Pella in Macedon?
Yes.
Probably, well, actually, in a way, nothing. When my former job, when I was working at Transport for London, I made a friend there who is a big fan of ancient Rome and Greece, and it was he who put me onto the HBO series, which I loved. It had already come out on disc DVD by then, so I was able to devour it, and it was. And then I started buying the books about the periods, and then it was he, my friend Elliot, who one day said, "Well, have you read about Alexander the Great?" I hadn't really. I knew about him. I had one book, I think, on my bookshelf from university days, which I don't think I'd bothered reading, and I still had that at the time. And I thought, well, let's check him out. And I love my heroes. Ever since I was young, I used to read comic books, American comic books. And I love the heroes and heroic actions there. At university, I'd learned about the Anglo-Saxon heroic code, the brave warriors who had gone down fighting ever so bravely. And that kind of thing really has always spoken to me very strongly, whether it's in the past or the more recent past in one of the world wars or in the Falklands War, Colonel H. Jones.
I vaguely remember him at the time. I mean, the Falklands War was one of the first news events I remember. Wasn't the first, but one of the first. And I remember that these people who they announced had been killed, who are known, and of course, in the last weeks of his life, Colonel H. Jones was well known on the television, and
he fell very bravely.
Yeah.
So it was my friend Elliot's suggestion that why don't you read about him, or I don't know if he lent me a book. Said, here, read this, and I read it and was instantly smitten, and haven't looked back since. So that's how I got into it. It wasn't through reading about ancient Rome. It was getting this second jump, the second spark from Eliot, because he had put me onto Rome to begin with, to say, what about Alexander? So that's how I got there. So yeah, through the HBO and then Eliot and on to Alexander again. And in those days, I was looking very much at the heroism of the battlefield. Nowadays, I've moved on a little, but if anyone says what first attracted me to reading about Alexander, or what attracts me to Alexander, or anything like that, it is the battles, I'll be honest. It is principally the battles and the heroism of them. We can argue about whether it's a good thing that he went on this conquest or this action or that action. He did a lot of things that were, I think, he did things even at the time that were bad or looked down upon. But heroism can exist within that. Heroism can exist within many different forms on and off battlefields. So yeah, that's what got me into him after I started reading, and it always pulls me back to him. His bravery on the battlefield, in pursuit of this goal, this never-ending goal of glory. wanting to win renown, to outdo his ancestors, Heracles,
Yeah.
Achilles, pardon me, and the like, and the people that he idolized. He was a massive fanboy as well of Cyrus the Great and Semiramis, so on and so forth, Dionysus.
Yes. Did he?
So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Yes, I did. With regards to Rome, do you well, I suppose both let's say the series, because that we know more about them as characters in the series. Could you see any comparison to Alexander in, say, either Octavian or Mark Antony or Julius Caesar at all?
I would not see any comparison as characters, as people,
Yeah.
between Octavian.
No.
He was a useless general. He very wisely left it to.
He had close friends, didn't he? Who he
Yeah,
left the thing too.
principally Agrippa.
Yes.
In the film, and one or two others, but principally him.
Yeah.
Octavian's strength was as a political leader. Alexander was okay as a political leader, but that wasn't his speciality at all. With Mark Antony's strength was as a soldier. So, yeah, Alexander was an infinitely better general than Mark Antony, but Antony was a good soldier. He would have made a good officer in Alexander's army. He would have been high up, one of the junior members of court, I imagine, because of his rank. Kind of like Ptolemy for much of Alexander's career. He got only promoted to the heights, to the upper end, a bit later on, which the film presents him as being in the inner court from the start, but that's really it, condensing or telescoping Ptolemy's career, bringing him to the fore from the start for narrative purposes. Julius Caesar, Caesar is the closest to him in terms of his excellence as a general. He's certainly a superior statesman to Alexander. There are plenty of people, I suspect, who say that Caesar was a better general, but I'm not having that. But Plutarch, who wrote a life of Alexander, he wrote a series of joint lives. So he would compare a Roman with a Greek, and it was Caesar and Alexander that he put together. So that comparison's been around for a long time. So Caesar, yes, to the greatest extent as a general, not Octavian. Whether in terms of HBO's Rome or not Octavian, and not to a very limited extent Mark Antony.
Octavian was more of a politician, wasn't he? I mean, he survived a very long while and died in his bed.
Yes, Octavian was a brilliant politician.
Yeah.
He remade Rome in his own image, and died in his bed. The comedy's now over, or whatever it was he said. I've played my part. He was Alexander was much more blunt as a blunt object, like one or two other people, when it came to politics. He did not have Augustus's, Octavian's subtlety, that slipperiness. But as a general, I think he's superior to any Roman. All of them. The only one who comes close is Julius Caesar. All the others are below him, especially people like Pompey, who tried to give himself the title Magnus because he had a big Alexander thing going on as well.
Yeah.
But that's my bias talking there.
I tend to, I suppose, partly from, Cicero comes across badly in Rome. He was a bit slimy, although very brave. Both in the series and in real life and everything else, by all accounts, when Cicero met his end, he was like, I do not approve of what you're about to do, but do it quickly. There was a bravery about him. and as I said, Cicero is a hero of mine. But I do think I've almost lost my train of thought there. We do. I do think that there's perhaps less more with ancient Rome and the Romans. I mean, Alexander was first and foremost a soldier.
Yeah.
Caesar was a soldier who became a politician, and I think, or both, and he suffered for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of a distinction I would make between the two.
Yeah.
Being a soldier and politician, I think they both went hand in hand. Yeah, he focused perhaps on being a politician after winning the Civil War, but he was always fighting, was always around the corner. And when he died, he was about to go off to Parthia for the campaign. So
just briefly then, because I'm suddenly aware of the time. It's a fine thing. If Alexander had lived, let's say he hadn't been poisoned or fallen ill or whatever caused his end.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think history would have panned out had he lived for another 25, 30 years?
If he had lived, I'm absolutely convinced that he would have carried on fighting for as long as he was physically possible.
Yeah.
As long as it was physically possible for him to do so. He was planning his next campaign when he died. Yeah. And I don't see any reason for him to have stopped. He was planning to take on Arabia, the tribes of Arabia.
Yes.
Moved on to Carthage and probably into Europe after that, Spain and Italy, and then further north. The world would have been his oyster because the tribes there would not have presented a great trouble, I think, for his army. The Romans, I doubt they would have been able to stop him, to be honest. It was still a bit early for them as a fighting force. So I think he would have, if he had continued, if he had not died on the battlefield in that time, I would hope that at some point he would start to put his empire in order, because otherwise it would start to collapse.
Yes.
With rebellions and what.
How long did it last? Sorry, how long did it last after his death, the empire?
Well, only a few years. Upon his death, he did not have an heir. His wife, one of his wives, Roxanne, was pregnant, and so he had a brother, a half brother, who was mentally deficient in some way. We don't quite know how, but he was allowed to live when Alexander became king, despite being older and therefore closer, as it were, to the throne, because of this deficiency. And he was declared king by the phalanx, the infantry people who were, I suppose, more of the traditionalists. So they went for the Macedonian, even if he was a puppet. And the cavalry went for the unborn son. But they were both of them were only ever puppets. So when it was a boy, thankfully, was born, Alexander IV, they were at the beck and call of other people. And Philip III, which was Alexander's brother, Avideus, he was killed within 7 or 8 years, around 316, I think. He was killed by Cassander. And then Alexander IV was killed around 310, 309, very quietly done away with. And at that point, you can say that the empire is definitively dead, because he was the last Argead, member of Alexander's house, to still be alive. So at that point, the game's up for the historic royal house of Macedon, and the generals become, well, they don't do it immediately. They waited 3 or 4 years, perhaps, to see how people reacted to the news of the death of the last Argead. And so by 305 and 304 BC, that's the point at which if they haven't already, they declare themselves kings, or in Ptolemy's case, pharaoh, I suppose. So the empire, strictly speaking, it lasted to 305, 304. But to all intents and purposes, it's over at the point at which Alexander dies, because it's his generals who are fighting each other
Yes.
at that point, and whether any of them intend. Well, there were some who were Alexander loyalists. We don't know if they would have continued the empire under the Argeads had they won the civil wars, because they lost it early on. Well, within a few years, they were dead. So yeah, the definitive end, I would say, is 305-04, but really, in a sense, it was over the minute Alexander died, because he didn't have a viable heir. He had died too young. If he had lived 20 or so years, there might have been more stability if his son was as good a king and general as he and his grandfather were. So, sorry, as his father and grandfather were, Alexander and Philip. But we'll never know that because it didn't happen. I'd like to think that had Alexander lived, he would at some point have firmed up his rule, his empire, and made it more stable, because it was very unstable from east to west when he died, because he had conquered, moved on. He hadn't taken the time to really bed in the fact that he was now in charge. So I would hope that he would have done more of that had he lived longer. But to be perfectly honest, I think he would have kept fighting. I don't see him as a great king, because I don't think he was that interested in ruling as one. He fulfilled the functions of a king.
Yes.
Way just fine, but for what he was doing, he needed to do so much more than what he actually did do. But his heart, I don't think his heart was there.
No.
It was on the battlefield, conquering, fighting, winning that glory, however he may, whether it was on the battlefield or through diplomacy. He never had a bloodlust. One shouldn't think that. If he could achieve a name by diplomacy, by peaceful means, then he would. If people came to him in supplication, he'd accept it, unless he had a good reason not to, or a particular reason not to. He would accept it, even if they had been enemies previously. So yeah, it's on that question, I'm full of hopes rather than firm beliefs.
Yes.
I hope he would have established his rule more firmly, but I can't, in all honesty, I can't say that I really believe that he would have done. I think he would have kept fighting. If he had not been able to fight, maybe at that point, but I'm not so sure about before. Yeah, he had too much of his ancestors, or the mythical figures that he believed to be his ancestors, in his blood.
Oh, well, that's, so I think, a good point to leave on and to dwell on, and just say thank you, Malcolm, for an 18 hour. I feel I've learnt more from this discussion than perhaps.
It's a pleasure to talk about it always. Yeah. We barely scratched the surface. So,
oh, indeed.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to get a bit of Rome in, which that's a pleasure as well. A reminder to myself to think about Rome a bit more, go and read a bit more about Rome, because, like we were saying, it started, my adventure in antiquity started with Rome in the 1st century BC. So, an exciting time, although I'm glad I didn't live in it.
No, well, I wouldn't. I would have. I think if I lived in that time, I would have led a very quiet life in the village.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, retired to an island.
Yeah. Anyway, well, all the best.
Thank you, and you too, and look forward to Zooming with you again sometime.
Indeed. We must consider the next film.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right, cheers.
See you later.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.